Hello friends, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today is backlog review. Hopefully we can make some dents into our remaining backlog. Let's start from the top down maybe, and then just see how far we get.
Are you intentionally not sharing your screen on Teams?
Of course I'm intentionally not sharing my screen because I thought we raised the difficulty level to level 3 where you have to do blind reviews.
I mean, you do have the weird computer problems every now and then.
Yes. Well, I can probably share my screen for the next 45 minutes before Teams again decides that this is not workable. Yeah, so I saw this yesterday, and I'm not entirely sure. I thought we already have APIs to something like this. Is that because we can't have generic pointers?
We have APIs that allow you to create a string from a char star, but we don't have APIs that are the equivalent of like strlen, which is really what this is looking for.
So this is a shortcut for new span point int dot max value, then index of the null termination character, and then slice.
Yep. Or, if you want to go the allocating way, Marshall dot whatever string from pitter, and then as span.
Yeah, this would be a no allocation way to do it.
Right.
Really, I think this should actually be a pair of APIs. One, the actual workhorse, which is like just WCSlen. Like, here's a char star, tell me how many characters it is before you hit the null terminator. And then a helper API on top of that, which is, okay, now that you have a char star and a nuint, make a span from it.
So basically, have an API that allows you to get the length without necessarily having to create a read-only span, which would also be beneficial if you want to create, say, a writable span.
Correct. Because we already have this API internally. We have to because new string of char star requires it, but we don't actually expose it publicly, which means the only, as was said here, the only way to do it right now safely is new string of char star dot as span, but it's allocating. The two lines on screen here, memory extensions dot index of and then slicing, it works as an internal implementation detail. It's not guaranteed to work tomorrow.
Why wouldn't it be guaranteed to work?
Because index of is free to assume that the entire span that you pass into it is validly dereferenceable.
Oh, that it could start at the end and work its way backwards or something?
If it wants to.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be a silly implementation, but it would fit the contract of the API. Right.
That if an out of bounds memory access happened because you gave it too big of a value, that was on you, not on it.
Yeah. So as a more practical example, if you pass in an infinite length span, like we might just say, oh, let's just read the unaligned first vector from it and then look for the null terminator. Well, that unaligned read could actually segfault, depending on how things happen to be aligned when you pass stuff into it. Like, it's just a scary implementation detail no one should take a dependency on.
Yeah, this read-only span value in max value does look a bit fishy.
Yeah, again, it's what we do internally as an implementation detail. And I actually just a few days ago even made a change to the source, adding a comment saying like no one should ever do this outside of corelib because it takes advantage of things that are subject to change.
But I mean,
anyway, yeah, the API is useful. The scenario is useful.
I mean, the API itself makes sense. I mean, so we still can't do T star, right?
If you can in certain cases.
So you can have a T, and you can have a T star, but you can't have some object of T star.
Yeah, I mean this wouldn't really make sense for T star because we're using the char star semantic of being terminated by a zero value.
Mm-hmm.
Like
that makes sense
doesn't
by
Only if you're asserting that the bytes are
Eight.
are ASCII
Or UTF-8.
Or UTF-8.
Yeah.
But should we
So-
have a generic API as well then? That basically has create span t star comma in length?
I don't think that's necessary because again, only wide and narrow strings are the things that people care about here. So that would be char, star, and byte star.
Creating a span from a pointer and a length is a constructor on span.
Yes.
They want to create a span
Oh, that's right.
from
Yeah.
a pointer and go sniff the length from the payload.
Right.
And the sniffing the length is the thing that only makes sense for char star, and possibly for byte star, but we would need to name the method to indicate what it's doing.
I would think we would also want to create a writable span by default. Otherwise, we need a separate method for creating a writable one, unless we go with Levi's proposal of make this just return the index of 0.
Yeah, I'm fine with having this writable by default. I mean, you're already in pointer world. Like type safety is already out the window.
Yeah, and I mean,
Right, but I mean the question is would it be better to expose memory marshal dot get string length of char star or the create span like this?
I'm honestly, I do think we need a Sterling equivalent API. I would put it on Marshall instead of memory Marshall, but sure.
I mean, we could just have something like, create from zero-terminated buffer or something like this, right? And then we could have 2 overloads, one that takes byte star and one that takes char star. That would not. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems within what memory marshal does, right? We have already create from pinned array, we have create read-only span, and we have create span, both from ref-ts. And so create from zero-terminated seems reasonable.
Fair enough. And then if you wanted read only, you have to just go through the extra work, which is fine.
Yeah. We can't make a create from zero-terminated generic. It would have to be char star and byte star. We can't do it with t star. The reason for that is as soon as someone uses double for t, things fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating for generic. I was just curious, but I completely missed the point in the beginning where this was sniffing the length.
Yeah.
And then it would return span of char, right, and span of byte, probably, right?
Yeah.
So
Sure.
would we call create from or create span from?
I would just call it create from because you already have create from pinned array, which also gives you back a span.
So create from null terminated,
Actually, create from pinned array gives you back a memory.
which makes sense.
Create from zero-terminated. Because
Yeah, create from zero-terminated seems
while
reasonable.
there's the null pointer and the null character, there's not really the null byte. So zero-terminated is more accurate.
Okay.
And after all, it's a SZ because it's string zero-terminated.
I just wonder if most people are going to be confused by the term zero because most people think of strings as null terminated.
Yeah.
And we are talking about strings, even if one of the overloads is byte star. It's just a narrow string instead of a wide string from the C perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm actually honestly undecided. Like, I think I usually say zero-terminated, but like I honestly don't know anymore.
Most of .NET refers to it as null terminated.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in our world we use null, right? But
Yeah. I'm not married to any of the names. I just want like a proper Sterling API in addition to this.
Could implement Sterling as create span dot length.
You can't because Sterling presumably would return a new int and create span if the string length exceeds int.max value will throw.
Yeah, but you're not going to be able to do much with it anyways if you do the other.
You can if you're passing things down to native APIs or have your own long span structure.
Fair. if we're adding byte and char, just to throw it out there, do we also want int?
For UCS32?
Yep. Which is a wcart on Unix.
So you lost me there. Like for which encoding is that?
So byte is UTF-8.
Yep.
.NET char is UTF-16. Int is UTF-32,
Oh.
which on Unix is the wchar_t type.
Yeah. Extra wide character strings.
I mean, it's really uint because pointers are unsigned, but or because character data is unsigned.
Is char unsigned in .NET technically?
Yes. Yeah.
Nope, char is signed.
Well, in C it is. In .NET it's unsigned.
Oh, in .NET, it is signed. It has an implicit conversion to short, not ushort, and comparison less than 0 is valid and returns the correct thing if it happens to be over 32,768.
I'm going to need you to show your work on that.
Weird. It came from the compiler team. I'll trust him.
Citation needed.
Team.
Yeah, I mean, I was under the impression char was signed as well because I think it has an implicit conversion to int as well. So like that's seems odd if that would be
But
unsigned.
ushort also has a conversion to int. It's you can always go from an unsigned small thing to a signed bigger thing.
Fair enough. I guess that's true.
Fair enough.
I mean, my care level is low. I mean, like if I don't know how popular UTF-32 is these days, but like, yeah, I mean, I have zero problem with the API. So if I mean, whether we do int or uint to me is also largely irrelevant because it's a pointer anyway. So you don't really care what it is.
UTF-32 is a space saver in China.
I guess.
That is true.
But how often do you create buffers over that shit? I don't know.
Never, because I can't read or write Chinese.
You're probably from our team, though, the closest person who can do it, who isn't from China. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if people feel strongly, I don't mind the int one.
Yeah, so...
You know what, Levi? I think I was crazy. I've got it reversed, except for when you do a compare. So the implicit conversion is to ushort, but if you do any kind of comparison, it implicitly converts to
int.
To int, yeah, because nothing is doing under below int. Yeah, that means basically it's unsigned, though, right? Logically.
Yeah.
Because it represents 64 something, not negative 31 something. So.
Well, either way, when you string it, it will give you some weird character.
Right.
Its max value is declared as 0xFFFF.
Okay, so
all bits
so
set.
we treat char as ushort.
Yeah. The first bit set.
So then basically, I would say let's have uint then instead of int.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, except all of our string and globalization APIs take int.
As the character type?
Yep.
Well, they take it to.
Before we added Rune, we have had overloads that take both int and string plus index for dealing with larger than char 16 types.
But those are dealing with code points, which are always defined to be a less than 24-bit value, as opposed to UCS32, or sorry, UTF-32, which is dealing with I mean, we can look at the Unicode spec and see what they call it.
But Jeremy's right, though. Those APIs, the APIs that take int often work with code points, whereas UTF-32 is a sequence of code units, which are ostensibly scalar values, not code points. The distinction is it's valid to pass an unpaired surrogate character into many of the APIs that take int, but it would never be valid to have those inside of a UTF-32 string.
But we have char convert from UTF-32 into UTF-32.
Yes, just because it's an older API, but the APIs in the globalization library do tend to understand unpaired surrogates and leave them alone. Like when you try to do a case conversion, for instance.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, I don't think it matters one way or the other, right? Because either if you have an instar, you can always cast it to uinstar anyway. So like, it's just
Indeed.
It's
If
not
we
like,
do it with stars, then yeah, it doesn't really matter. So.
Okay, I don't have a huge preference here.
Yeah, I just want the separate API that gives you the length as a new int.
I think that putting it as uint star makes it like it is a little bit better signaling, and the fact that you have to write the extra conversion means that you're less likely to do it on, you know, numerical data. That it is a stop and think about this and make sure it's a string. So I think it's both more honest and the slight hurdle of please think. So
I would also be willing to either hunt the int one until we actually need it, or just deprioritize it in the sense that maybe it's not as efficient as the other two overloads.
yeah, I mean, I can do with it as well. Like, I don't mind not having the UTF-832 one. Like, as I said, I think the number of times I have seen UTF-32 in practice, I can count on one hand. Does anybody have opinions on this, Jeremy? Tanner?
I'm always fine to hold things back.
Then let's do that. Because then also we probably have better data on like what would be more convenient, instar or uinstar. Not that it matters in practice, but it seems nice to do that.
I'm pretty sure it just depends on whatever people are going to be writing their interop code as.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, I mean, usually when we add the method, we already have prior art, and then we can make a decision. Let's hold back UTF-32 until we need it. Yeah.
For what it's worth, ICU defines it as unsigned long. They're UCHAR 30 or they're 32 UCS 32 code unit type. They define as unsigned long on systems that believe long means. I guess it doesn't matter. Long's always big enough.
Speaking of long.
So do we have like Marshall.Sterlen in addition to this, or do we just scrap it?
You want an actual stringling API? I mean,
an actual Sterlen API, yeah. Because you can, if you had an actual Sterlen API, you could always build these on top of it, but you can't do it the other way around.
Right. I mean,
why Marshall and not memory Marshall?
Just because it doesn't deal with span, array, or memory.
Well, it does deal with not that memory, but memory in general.
Yeah, I think memory Marshall was meant to be memory or span related, right? Memory the type, not memory as in the RAM.
It doesn't deal with any types that exist in system buffers or that package or system memory.
What was the thing you're suggesting? Literally Marshall?
Literally Marshall.Sterlen, Marshall.WCSlen. Like Sterlen would be lowercase strlen, WCSlen would be lowercase WCSlen. They take byte star and char star, they return nuint.
We can't do WCS len because that's wchar t, which is different depending on the platform.
Why not buffer?
And we wouldn't put the POSIX casing on Marshall, which has everything else as Pascal casing.
Okay, so then we rename it. But the APIs would take a char star or a byte star and would return nuint. And it would have to be nuint. It can't be.
Could we just call it index of null terminated character or something?
I wouldn't call it that because every other index API we have returns int and returns -1 to mean I can't find it.
Yeah, but this is on Marshall where we frequently return inputter instead.
Yeah, I mean, if we were going to put it on Marshall, presumably it would be Marshall.pitter to string length ANSI, pitter to string length uni, pitter to string length UTF-8.
Sure.
because then it matches pitter to string, and it's pitter to string length. So,
I mean, can I suggest buffer as opposed to Marshall?
what's on buffer?
Memory copy.
Buffer has pointer consuming APIs. Does it have anything aside from copy?
It has block copy, byte length, get byte, and set byte. And they all deal with like array, the generic array type. Uppercase array.
Yeah.
I think memory copy is the only one that takes pointers. But I mean, it seems like it's more like that. Like Marshall is such a shit show today. I would not put an API there if you actually care of using it. Because Marshall is really more about interop, right? Versus this one is, I have some memory and I would like to find the zero in it.
Sure.
I don't know. Offset.
Buffer.get string length, ANSI buffer.get string length, uni, and buffer.get string length UTF-8.
Well, ANSI and UTF-8 are going to be the same.
Fair enough.
How do you... So, Levi, you said you want this to return uint. Why not ulong?
No.
Nuint.
Oh.
Nuint because it's the appropriate type
Yep.
for doing this kind of work.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because they return... At least I believe Sterling returns size T, which is on modern systems is unsigned register width.
Yeah.
And then what would the input be?
Char star or byte star.
Yeah.
So what was the first one? Byte star or?
Char star.
Yeah. And the behavior of the API is if you pass in a null pointer, it throws. If you pass in a non-null pointer, it either returns or AVs.
Yeah, just like Sterling.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask the SDL question of do we need them to take do we need the stir inlen variant of where you tell it the stop looking after this point?
I don't think we would need that, and the reason that I don't think we need that is because at that point you can literally just create a span and then call index of.
Unless you think it's beyond the 32 or the 31 and a bit mark.
Yeah, the last time I copied 5 terabyte of data. I don't know, like it seems a bit weird to pass in the length because the whole point is you don't know the length, right? And then you have to basically pass in a fake length, which seems to kind of...
No, so the purpose of the length is for security. So for example, in C, it is fairly common to define a fixed width buffer as part of a struct. For example, you might say the maximum length of this name is 128 characters. So you never want to read past 128 characters.
I see.
But the null terminated character could be at digit, 14 because the name of this is 5700 XT.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that we would need it possibly as a defaulted to
-1.
I mean, the question is what type are we taking? Presumably we're taking another size T as the input. And then that means that we would need proper overloading where one of them is Sterling and one of them is stir inlen.
Wait, why would you need overloading for that?
I guess we could default it to max value, though I don't think we can do default values with nuint. Because they don't have compile time constants other than default.
You can do constants up to uint.maxValue.
Yeah, but we would need going up to ulong.max value.
So why can't we just have the version that doesn't take it and then the version that takes it and they just be overloads of each other because it's one additional parameter?
Yeah, that's why I said we'd have to do proper overloading.
Okay.
We couldn't default it because we can't default it to -1 if we do an unsigned type as the size T limit.
I think Tanner heard that you suggested different names for the methods. I think they should have the same name, just basically different arguments, right?
Yeah, so we'd have like get string length of char star and get string length of char star comma nuint max length, and then the same thing for star.
I mean, the one, yeah, I think that seems a bit more reasonable. Like, I don't like the index of suggestion for span. It's not that it's wrong. It's just, it's a completely different way of doing it, and it's not very obvious that that's what you're supposed to do when you have a length, right? So I actually like the idea of just having two overloads that remind you that there is a length you may want to pass in if you have one. Or a maximum, I guess, is the way to put it.
Right.
So what's the name then? Like, Struling doesn't seem like a great API name, but
I would go with get string length.
yeah, I was suggesting get Zero-terminated offset, but that seems maybe a bit verbose. String length seems reasonable.
Why not index of null character?
Yeah, I mean, index of null or index of zero would also work for me.
So index of, again, it's assumed that you're going to return -1 if the null terminator isn't found before the maximum length is hit, whereas with a proper Sterling API, you would want to return the maximum length instead of -1.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I said offset, I guess. But yeah, I mean, get string length, it makes sense, right? Because then you actually imply that, well, if you don't find
and really, we're
the
just
maximum.
expanding the C name Sterling, right?
Yeah. Well, and we put get in front of it, but yeah. It seems
right,
more
and
that
then we're saying methods need a verb. So.
And then what is the length then? NUint as well?
Correct.
The return value would be an unsigned native integer.
You know, I'm asking for the length argument or the maximum, right? That would be NUint. Yeah.
Yes.
Then.
Which is why we need an overload instead of a default, because we need the default to be the max value, but we can't do literals that are the max value for 64-bit systems.
Right.
This is going to be fun to test. I guess we already have tests for new string of char, so you could probably adapt that easily enough.
Mm-hmm.
Maxium.
So what is the other one called? String length. The safe one in C?
Stir in lin.
Like this? Or N?
If you think that I can see something through Teams, you are mistaken.
So nobody can see my screen again?
I see your screen. It just possibly no longer reflects what your screen actually looks like.
YouTube says str in len. So we said zero-terminated, not null-terminated.
Oh, sorry.
I think that null is the name of the character whose value is 0. So I could be okay with null. It's just a little weird because we're not using byte star as byte star. We're using byte star as actually char star, and there's a little bit of a signal disparity there. So what I like for 0 is it seems being a little clearer that we mean a 0 value in a byte, not we're using this byte star as just an arbitrary memory address that we're interpreting as a tchar.
Guarantee you someone's going to think you mean 0x30.
Fair enough. We can call it null.
Yeah, considering this is primarily meant for interop scenarios, I do think null is the better name, because when you're dealing with C, it is called null.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and in C# it's called the null character.
Well,
yeah, but I mean, even the null,
but...
even the null byte is like the null character in C.
And then is it maximum or max length for the parameter?
Yeah, maximum length is probably the better way to put it. Max length maybe probably is more in line with how we name things.
Yeah.
Either way, you spelled it wrong.
In POSIX, it's called in. I think.
So then like this? Everybody happy with that?
Ooh, POSIX calls it max len.
I think that's fine, yeah. And again, the behavior is if you pass a null, it throws. And if you don't pass a null, it returns or your machine catches fire. Yes.
Nice. All right, then we bike shed this one to death, I think. Alterna, you can bike shed about random.
Yay.
What?
And
We're improving random.
Oh, that random.
So why do we need this?
So basically today there isn't a way to get a 64-bit random value without having to construct it yourself. This is mainly a convenience API for, in fact, getting a 64-bit integral in the right length.
And
what's the scenario? When do you want this?
You want a 64-bit random value. We actually use this for all kinds of our tests where we have a fixed seed, but we have helper methods to get us the random value from that fixed seed and we do it for all the primitive types.
Right, but my question is, when do you want a random long?
The scenario I just described. Testing is a perfect example. And it's something that we use today in our own.
So if testing is the only scenario, then I don't think we should also mirror this onto the cryptographic random number generator type.
Notably, the things that are missing from system random today are long, ulong, and I believe single from the primitive types. Okay. The others are things like byte, short, are fairly easy to do using the existing int APIs.
Yeah, so why the heck do we have next double, but not next single?
Because no one added single APIs to the framework until I added MathF like 5 years ago.
I was gonna say, because no one other than Tanner uses float.
No, but it seems weird to, like, basically on the int size we have only 32-bit. On the floating point size we only have 64-bit. It's like,
but those are kind of the natural sizes for each of those numeric types.
I guess, but
int is our normal integer type, and double is our normal floating point type.
Fair enough.
Yeah, because we added on the CSP RNGs, we added the next int because it was for, like roll a die and take a random index. But
right.
If we don't have a scenario calling for putting it on the CSP RNG, then we should just stick on the bad random.
Oh man, we even misspelled the character on the constructor. Oh Jesus Christ, we called it seed with capital S. Man, they really did not care about naming conventions in V1. Anyway,
this API looks fine, honestly.
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable for what it does. I was a bit.
Do we want that?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just. Do we want to add next single as well? Just while we're at it.
I mean, it seems like weird that normally I think of these APIs as being constrained by some sort of bitness size, right? And it seems weird that we have like some weird slice through this whole thing. I think given that we normally do these things, they will probably add next float as well, yeah, or sorry, next single. This seems reasonable to have. Because then we can say we support 32-bit and 64-bit natural sizes. And then next bytes if you really need it.
I actually do see a potential scenario for calling this API from WinForms, weirdly enough.
From WinForms?
They have an API that calls random.next and then casts the result to an int pointer. So presumably the correct behavior of that call site would actually be, if you're on a 64-bit platform, call ran.nextLong instead of ran.next. It's a bit weird, but
I don't even want to know.
So my other question is, next double only that doesn't take any arguments, so there's no way to construct ranges. I guess that is the way it is.
So I almost want to say that's by design. There's So in the floating point representation, double takes 64 bits, but half of all representable values exist between -1 and +1. So it's really complicated to try and say, I want a value within this range, because there's going to be a huge bias towards everything within 0 and 1, and then that bias shrink, or the number of values that are possible within a given range shrink as it goes up. So if, for example, if you said, I want a double between 2 to the power of 53 and 2 to the power of 54, you've got basically 2 values to pick from.
The silence is my head exploding.
Yeah, what he's saying is double is hard and no one understands it. So
Yeah, that's what I heard.
don't be fancy.
All right, so that means we have next in 64, next in 64 with long max value, next in 64 with long min value and long max value, and we have next single with no arguments.
Ship it.
Yeah, it seems fine, honestly.
Unsigned values?
Yeah,
Cast.
Yeah.
they're the non-natural ones.
Yeah, just unchecked cast.
I think that's what we already do for unsigned 32-bit.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. Yeah, unsigned cast.
Yeah, I mean the fact that we also have the one that random has next bytes that takes a span means you can solve anything by just by building a span to the address of whatever.
Yeah.
And then it will fill it with random data. The bounds ones are what make the integer ones interesting.
Presumably that last API should return a float MO.
Of course. What did I make it return? Double?
Long.
Yeah.
Seems fine to me. It would probably be about 3 years before anyone noticed anyway.
Speaking of 3 years, so here's an issue from actually from this year. Never mind. So what is this?
Convenience APIs for writing data to a file.
Holy cow, that's a lot of data, a lot of APIs.
They're overloads largely of existing APIs, or I shouldn't say overloads, analogs to existing APIs.
They should all be just overloads, right?
So there are some things that actually follow patterns that we haven't yet established.
I think we have not all the async variants, for example. I think we only added a few.
Yeah. Yeah, so for example, append all lines async, the current overloads take IEnumerable of string. These proposed overloads take IEnumerable of read-only memory of char. I'm not, I don't know if we have existing APIs that take like IEnumerable of memory.
No, and I have to say, like, unless somebody gives me a scenario for this, I have a hard time buying that scenario. Because it seems like it's this, on the one hand side you have low level information like read-only memory, and then on the other side you have this super high level thing which is IEnumerable of something, and then you want to write it to an existing file, which seems now you're in the 0.003 percentile.
Mm-hmm. Does read-only sequence, it only gives back spans, right? Not memories?
That is a good question. I feel like I should know this.
Because if it gives back memories, then you could theoretically have a read-only sequence of char and write a yield return enumerable that just returns all of its subsequent span pages.
It gives back both.
Memory pages. So that would be the scenario for that. Now, maybe we say it's not common and we don't care yet, but that would be
So your
that would be
scenario
the case.
is an iterator over read-only sequence?
Yeah.
Yeah, read-only sequence allows you to get the underlying memory if you need it.
So if you had read-only sequence of char, then
I have to be honest.
An iterator over the sequence.
I am not a fan of doing these because I mean these are literally the APIs you use in quick and dirty, easy to do stuff, and I just have a hard time blending that with span and memory.
That's fine, but like I said, I'm always happy to hold things back. I was just defending or coming up with a when would you use it.
I could imagine, Jeremy, were you advocating these APIs taking read-only sequence instead of IEnumerable of read-only memory?
No.
I think he was just trying to answer the question of like, when would you ever have a combination of read-only memory and IEnumerable? And he was saying that if you traverse a read-only sequence, you would, and you would have an iterator that basically would give you the memories to the individual items in that thing that you found.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Again, the yield return iterators are struct in retail builds, and right, so it would still fit the spirit of all the, low allocy of using the stuff. But I think that it's fine that we hold that one back until there's actually request, and the request may manifest as read-only sequence, which then we can decide if we want read-only sequence this low, or we decide that you can write the yield return yourself and we take the IEnumerable of memory. But the simple ones, the append all text, a read-only span char contents, again, that's a quick way of writing a substring to a file without needing to make a copy.
Yeah.
So all the ones that take read-only memory of char instead of string that aren't themselves part of another generic composition seem easy. But back to what you'd said, Levi, of not all of these are overloads, some of them are new concepts. Do you mean anything other than IEnumerable of memory instead of IEnumerable of string? Because if these are all
what I meant.
Okay, because like if we, for example, didn't have write all text that took path and contents without the encoding, then we should add the string overload if we were adding it here. But if these are all just overloads of drop-in replacement, Rosh char instead of string, then they're fine. Or
I mean, I would go. I mean, I would say like the only thing I see in this issue here is he's basically pointing out the first one would be you just call 2-byte array, which would allocate, which I don't know. Like the only reason why I use these file convenience helpers is usually because the things I'm processing is small, or I just cook up a quick and dirty command line app, which I don't care what performance it does. And yes, if I test something that is low level, I can see myself wanting to persist something that is read-only memory because that's the algorithm that I'm actually testing. But then I also don't care about perf, so I wouldn't mind doing 2-array in those cases, right? But like the second one is a bit more nuanced. I think he's saying that creating a file stream instance with an appropriate file options is verbose. That is the thing I think we may want to address. Like, it seems reasonable for me. We already have these open and create ones on file that give you back a file stream. Maybe we should have one that would deal with creating something that is truly asynchronous, right? Because that's today also not great because file stream's last argument is async, and that's verbose, right? But that's the only thing that I see myself doing for file, to say like, if you want to asynchronously, if you want to create a file stream that is truly asynchronous, that's too many lines of code. And then we would do that.
I mean, I feel that in the design guidelines that the file class itself actually comes up as that it was added because there was a collective feeling that I have this data already built. Why do I need to say, using a file stream, go write the stuff like that, especially the text ones, because you have to open not the file stream, you have to open the string writer version of it, or the text writer or whatever. And that it's the like, wow, it feels like saving this text to a file or saving these bytes to a file when I've already have them, and I don't need to do it. There are no pieces that I can do, because that's the append all lines async is totally, just build the stream.
Right.
The append all lines of IEnumerable is like, yep, until that we feel that's a common scenario, you can do it with opening the file stream. But the append all text of read-only span char contents, or the append all text async of read-only span char contents. To me, that seems like we're just making an accelerator for a thing people would do commonly, and it totally meets the purpose of the file class of you have your data already, you just want to save it to a file, you're avoiding the dance.
So I agree with that. It's just that I think we need to be careful what data we are supporting, right? Because it seems weird to me to say, I have all my data already in memory, but I'm highly geared for performance, so I deal everything in read-only memory chunks. But then I couldn't be bothered with writing 2 lines of code that actually write it to a file. That seems like a weird combo.
This would be you have some data you've loaded in, and you called the non-allocating trim. So you called the read-only memory of char version of trim, so that you got the in-place bounded range of where the white space has gone, and then you call save on that. Like, I think that there are definitely, again, looking at it as representing the answer for substring. If we had span in memory back in the beginning, I think that there's a good chance that we would have said string.substring returns a slice instead of a new string, and then this would have been the obvious thing to take, is take an arbitrary slice of a string. So.
Yes, I don't think we ever would do that, because again, like slices are so inconvenient to use versus strings are way more convenient.
Well, that's because of where we are with 15 years. That's why if we were doing it all from scratch.
Well, I mean,
yeah,
like,
I agree with Jeremy there.
But the restrictions are the same, right? I mean, like, if I give you read-only span of char, that is nowhere near as convenient as a string, for the very simple reason you can't assign it to a field, for example, right? Like, you have all the ref struct semantics that come with that, which in mainline scenarios you don't care. Like, why would you?
Right. I think fine. So it wouldn't have been read-only span of char. It would have been read-only memory of char.
Maybe.
Because that's
that one I can see more, but even then it's like, well, it's still a generic type, right? So like, yes, you can play tricks with extension methods and generic specialization to give them a bit more of a string-like feel, but yeah, I mean, for something as essential as string, I have a hard time seeing that. But yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, to me, it's more like file is really meant as a fast way to write a file, right? Because we have string reader, stream reader, and stream to basically make arbitrary processing of files. And I think, to me, the way I read the book was the incident in the 2.0 time frame was people who came from a Java background got it. People who came from any other background didn't get it because they were not exposed to this, combining things in the pipeline, basically. But then we are saying here we have these building blocks that people use in context of these, things, but they're not aware of stream or text writers, and that seems somewhat backwards to me. Like, I mean, I think if you already have data in memory, you most likely have it in a convenient fashion, right? Which is a byte array or a string. Like, I really have a hard time seeing somebody, I already have a IEnumerable of read-only memory of char, and I just want to have it in one line to a file, when the alternative would have been 3 lines of code, right? We're not talking about 50 lines of code, right? So it's not like it's a lot more work. It's just that it's this blending of these super low level concepts with super high level APIs, and I think what I don't like about this is that this explodes so badly, right?
Fair. Like, I agree with the IEnumerable of whatever. That one, I guess it can only be IEnumerable of the memory because you can't use a span as a generic type argument. But the
right.
So I agree that you probably don't already have the IEnumerable as a convenient thing, and once you had to write the yield return, you could have just written the span right yourself. But the write all text of read only span of char contents, again, I think that's you did some trimming or some manual splitting, and it's you had some data and you're writing it into 3 different files. You have it in one string. It just saves on the copies. Maybe you even are generally working with it as spans and you're doing some temporary writing, and we're just making it. It's just convenience overload, effectively. I mean, it's an overload on a different type, but
that's the thing. To me, convenience kind of like it's somewhat backward. If the thing you're doing is already so convoluted but now the persistence is not the thing that breaks it. It seems a bit weird. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, you already did extraordinary gymnastics to get these read-only memories to begin with, or spans, right? You usually don't have them that handy, right? They're not floating around that much. That is a common thing. I mean, you have strings all the time. I get it, even byte arrays are already somewhat rare, right? But then when we actually talk about spans and memories, now you're really talking about the the really long end of the spectrum. And these are mainline APIs. So do we really want people, when they write their first C# program, they want to just write a text file and they call write all text and they open IntelliSense and there's like 5 overloads or 8 overloads with, unspeakable names? Like, is that really the experience we want to people to have? Like, I don't know.
Well, we've had this question posed in the past where is it reasonable for us to keep using, like, what's the IntelliSense experience like as a crutch for adding or not adding an API? But I definitely do agree with the overall point you're trying to make, though. Like, the string is clearly an exchange type used commonly within the ecosystem. Span and memory tend not to be frequently used exchange types. They tend to be things that you pass down to Leaf APIs, but not necessarily like between different modules, unless the modules themselves were created by the same author.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like, if you have a read-only span of char, how fast can I get a string out of that, right? So that I can call write all text, for example. Like, and if this is literally like 2 string or 2 array, then I don't care. It's like, yeah, it's not performant, but like if you really wanted to perform it, then I think it's okay for you to write the, file.open, and then stream.write, right? I mean, that seems reasonable. If you really cared. I mean, if you really do processing over spans and you want to write it to a file. But I think these are really meant to be accelerators, right?
That's fair. So, I mean, I'm willing to believe or be convinced by the suggestion of that file is a type that we want to not, like, that it's too early in the learning.net pipeline to be suggesting memory and span. Like, that is I don't know that I 100% believe it, but that's an argument that makes sense to me. And again, definitely I'm with you on you don't have an IEnumerable of read-only memory. It's the same amount of work to call. If we added that overload, it's the same amount of work to call the overload as it is to just use the stream directly. So just use the stream directly. But to me, so this is okay to me, but if we want to say no, that's also okay to me. For the ones without the IEnumerables. Yeah,
so my concern here is like it just grows, right? Because I mean, we have seen this in other places where we do take spans, that the amount of flavors we have for buffers is just getting larger and larger, right? So the next step then is, well, what if we have UTF-8? Do we take all the ones we just wrote and then copy paste and replace char with byte, and then you at some point end up literally with like 12 overloads for, I just want to write the string to a file, right? And that seems not great.
That's fair. I mean, largely when we're doing variant inputs as opposed to overloads of complexity, in a lot of cases we just write that off as it's fine. But like I said, if you think that this one is you're using it in CS 101 and oh my god, what is this read-only span of char sitting next to this string thing that I understand? I guess what seems weird to me is that it took string path instead of Ross char path. But like, once it's going to take a Ross char on one of them, why didn't it take it in all of them? But yeah, so maybe this is fine for no, because the workaround's not hard, and if you want the accelerator, you can write it yourself. It's 3 lines of code.
Yeah, the string path actually doesn't surprise me all that much, just because file names either tend to be hard-coded, read from config, something like that. So I think you already naturally tend to have them available as strings anyway.
Fair enough. I guess, yeah, if we haven't added anything on like file stream that takes a Ross char path, that would be part of why it would be here, because we'd have to do a lot of plumbing to make it work. But so yeah, I don't know. Maybe Emo, you've convinced me that saying no is the right answer.
Yeah, I think no seems like a reasonable starting point, and then we can see where we take it from there.
Out of curiosity, how many upvotes are we looking at on this?
I don't think a single one. Like, one person asked for it, and then
okay,
a bunch of people were commenting on it.
Yeah, I was gonna using the upvotes as a measure of are people excited about it, and it doesn't.
Yeah, Jan's primary feedback is don't use value task. But
we could also go through our own sources and see if any of our own call sites would be able to take advantage of these new overloads. I don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do that check myself, to be honest, but it would be an interesting exercise probably.
Yeah, yeah. Could you post a comment and tag Carlos on it? Because I think he owns that.
Sure.
I think, yeah, the question to me would be, like, should we make at least creating an asynchronous file stream easier, right? Because today that's like you have to call the file stream overload that takes like 12 arguments or something, right? Is it not one of those guys?
We have, I guess file has file.open, file.open write or something, but file.open async feels weird because it sounds like async is the way that you're opening something, but you're really just trying to open it for asynchronous control, and really you're only doing that because the APIs are weird and you need to decide a priori
but
if
you
want
could
an
have
asynchronous stream or not.
But you could have like a, you know, I think we have create, open, and open read, right? But you could imagine we just have those suffix with for async. That does not seem unreasonable to me.
Yeah, but I think that requires more thought than us just making something.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I'm just trying to like sketch it in the thing. Like, if the argument is that creating a file stream is too hard, for example, opening it for async, I'd rather we add dedicated methods for that, such as open for async.
Yeah, and Jan is right. For the non-generic task versus value task, you need to have a very strong reason why to use task. Sorry, why to use value task. Generic or non-generic task is the right answer 99% of the time.
I mean, the one thing is we very rarely reject API proposals, so I don't feel too bad. I mean, most of the time I say looks almost good or looks good. So I think it's okay every once in a while to say no.
Every now and then we approve it while having rewritten it entirely, but
right. I mean, like, yeah, the 90% answer for us is approve with feedback, right?
I think what Jeremy's saying is we should add an overload that takes OS platform.
What? I think you lost me.
I think he's just trying to make you cry.
Yeah. I mean, things that we tend to rewrite on the fly.
Oh yeah, we do that too. The funniest thing is when we approve a completely different API. It's not like rewritten, it's just, yeah, instead of doing this, how about we give you the building block over there? Not what you asked for, well, that's what you get. Is there any of context on this one here?
I was gonna say, didn't we already talk about it? But I realized I'm looking at Teams instead of YouTube.
Haha.
Yeah, what are they wanting to add?
Schemes.
SSH, FTPS, and WebSockets.
So WS and WSS totally makes sense because we added WebSocket support. FTP, I mean, these are just strings, so they're fine.
Yeah, I mean, my question really is like, what does it impact our parsers at all? Don't we have these like internal private URI parsers for all the schemes?
Somewhere we also, I think, maybe have an enum that's returned from URI, but I think URI.scheme just returns a string, and then you're just recommended to compare it against, URI scheme HTTPS, even though you know that says HTTPS.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the only implication that we expose 5 or 6 constant strings, then I have no problems. But like, if that implies us writing another 30,000 lines of parsing code somewhere, then I'd be more inclined to say, well, which one do we actually need?
Yeah. Well, both Corey and Miha commented on the issue, saying that they think this is a worthwhile change. And I would imagine that had this involved a lot of code churn, they would have spoken up.
Yeah, I mean, Carol seems to be more on the like, what value does it add thing. But it seems he was convinced at the end that it's just a shorthand for well-known schemes. I mean, it seems fine. I mean, like if it's literally just a well-known string, I think it's totally fine to have that.
Yeah, the one thing that we do seem to use those built-in names in association with is URI, when parsing things that it knows about, will fill in the default ports for you. So like if you, because I looked of what do we use NNTP URI for,
Right.
Because that is very vague, right? And the only thing that I really see in it is, yes, we have in the URI parser, we have a table, we build the thing once, and all that the table has is like, if we understand the scheme, what's the default port and what are some syntax flags that are associated with it, which I don't know what our breaking change model would be at this point. Like, would we start rejecting SSH : values that we used to accept? But that would be the non-API follow-up. Is does URI parser need to special case these as well?
Yeah, I mean that's I think to me it's kind of
But
like the names make
URI
sense.
parser already special cases WebSocket or WS and WSS. So in that sense, we've done the inside work without exposing the public constant. So SSH and Telnet are probably the only weird one. Nope, Telnet we have. SSH is the only one that we may need to add URI parsing support for.
Like looking through the URI parser, it actually looks like it's not all that difficult to add knowledge of new protocols, because it looks like they just maintain a set of internal requirements that a particular structure has, and it's just a bitwise combination of that. So if they wanted, if you can describe SSH using their existing flags, then it's just choose the right bitwise combination and go.
Right. I'm just that may introduce a breaking change where if currently URI doesn't throw, if you give it the string, SSH :
sure,
whatever, and then now they add the URI parser logic for it and it fails, then but I don't know what their failure modes are, so that's things for them to consider. But
that also seems like the kind of thing that we might actually do between major versions, honestly.
Maybe. But yeah, but for WebSocket and WSS, those are both already supported by URI parser.
Yeah.
SFTP and FTPS are not, SSH is not, and Telnet is. So some of these are, we've already done the parser work, exposing the const. It has no real ramification. The other half are the question of, do we also add special casing to them in URI parser? And then what breaking change does that entail?
Yeah.
So, but as far as the API is concerned, it all seems legit to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, so basically what I would do is I said, let's improve the API because there's no concern of the shape. I will just raise the point of, is there any other work that this would require? And then suggest that if there is, maybe we want to be more selective. So here's my comment. Let me know if you disagree with that.
Yeah, and it would be up to NCL if they want to support like SFTP and FTPS, for instance. I honestly didn't realize FTPS was a thing. Like I thought, SFTP was kind of the universal standard, but whatever.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated than like SMTP with start TLS versus SMTP over a TLS channel. Like, because I think SFTP came out of SSH and FTPS is do FTP with TLS, and that they're actually very similar letters for very, very, very different protocols. one of them IE supports and the other one it doesn't.
Okay.
All right, so then let's go back here. What do we have next? Already opened that. Yeah, so I don't think this one is ready really. Like there was a lot of feedback on the API. I should probably mark this back as needs work. So basically what this was for, right? So this is the we have this thing in WPF and WinForms where, sorry, not there. We have it in the Visual Basic DLL that you can basically say, I want a single instance app. And when you do that, they do the heavy lifting of creating a mutex for you on startup. And then if the app is already running, they basically forward the command line arguments to the existing instance. So that's actually quite nice because it means it's very easy for you to write a multi-instance app, like a document editor basically. And then if somebody opens another instance, they just forward you the path to the existing instance and you just open the file in the existing one, which is actually quite nice. The problem is that we want some building block that is lower level than VB so that we can support it directly in WinForms without requiring all of the VB.dll to be used by someone. And you can also make some aesthetic arguments that C# people are offended by referencing VB.dll in order to do single instance apps. But the question is what that would mean. And when I talked with Kathleen, there was an idea about providing a building block like this. We don't really expect this to be used by most people. We would expect that building block would be used by WinForms and WPF or MAUI or whatever other app model we have. So that basically we have unified cross-platform plumbing, if you will, but then we also have a very convenient app model experience for this. But people had concerns about the shape, and it was the question of like, should we even have a building block if we expect people to use the app model specific ones? And I think that's fair feedback. And I think there was not much traction on the VB side of this or the WinForms side of it. So I'm inclined to just say needs work and then come back when we actually have something.
IO is definitely a weird place for a class named single instance app.
I agree with that.
If all it's doing is creating the pipes for you and it's just doing it in a standardized way, then that would make sense as an accelerator in IO, but it would need a different name. Presumably this is all about the figuring out what we want app model components to look like. I was trying to look for a namespace that felt related to that, and the closest I got was STA thread and MTA thread, which are both in system, which I don't think is a good fit for this.
I was looking through some of the discussion just now, and I can understand this for UI-based applications, WinForms, WPF, and so on. I can't say I can think offhand of any examples of console applications that have a single instance model. And I can't really think of services that have that model either. And the reason that I don't think
C# compiler?
C# compiler is not a single instance app, is it? Like I type CSC at the command line, it actually launches an instance of CSC.
They definitely have the weird thing with the server mode, which is why you have to, when you're moving to a new checkpoint in .NET runtime, you have to kill all .NET processes because they've done they spin up a host and then they essentially just marshal the arguments into that host, and then that way it didn't need to spin up all the DLLs again. They eliminated process activation.
But that's also a good example of like, it's not really single instance, right? It's multi-instance because they are attached to particular workspaces, right? They're not just for anything you want to compile, right? That's
fair enough. I mean, but even things like Word, technically there's a second instance of Word for a moment while it's figuring out it just wants to send things back to the UI host. So it's the notion of if you would have any sort of console process that is if I'm the first runner, then I'll also be the work executor. Otherwise, I just enqueue things to the executor and terminate. Granted, it's way less common in console applications. I'm just saying it's not nonsensical.
Yeah. Well, I'm also looking at things like services and daemons called out here, which my understanding is that those tend to be monitored by a watchdog or by service manager, and that there's no logic within the executables themselves to say, am I already running?
Right. They may want the named pipe for doing something like, the NTP command talking to NTPD, but but they're not really. They're probably not the same process. They might be the same process. Unix tools really like switching on arg0, but
I hate that baby.
But it does make. But yeah, this does have the interesting, and I do agree with Emo. I think that there was a discussion of this a while back, that there are a bunch of application model things that make sense across WPF, WinForms, and Maui that historically have been essentially duplicated or more, because WPF and WinForms both have a class called application, and it's like, well, only some of what they do was related to their app model. Some of them are just like, I am an app. And so how do we do that for the UI stacks and the mobile apps and console apps when it makes sense to do so? So I think this is part of that.
Okay. Yeah, I saw, Emo, you just marked it as needs work then. Okay.
Yeah, I think this one needs more love. I think, so to me, there's two sides to it. There's I'm not gung-ho about the namespace choice. I don't think it belongs in system.windows, and we don't really have an app model namespace today. There was another idea that Glenn was pushing fairly hard at some point, which was reuse the host builder pattern from ASP.NET across all other app models. I think Olia was recently looking into this for WPF and WinForms, so that would make sense. So presumably there might be some sort of app model namespace that we open up for that. I highly doubt that we would share things like application, because they're just too big to do anything with them, and so they will never go away in WPF and WinForms. But like these common services like single instance mode, or even some Windows registration, maybe the taskbar tray thing that we have, they're not really related to UI choice, right? They're just kind of like global stuff that you may or may want to do. And I could see that Maui also benefiting from this, but like we would have to design this further. Like this one was basically just based on what Chuck basically sketched up as a building block out of the VB.dll, and so that was it.
Yeah, and I also thumbs up the issue because I do want to. I do think this is worth pursuing somehow.
And I mean, to me, it doesn't even matter whether it's console apps or not. I think it's more like there's like so many different UI paradigms you would have. And they could all share this, right? But it would, almost all would be very heavy apps probably. Anyway, so let's close this one for now. Is Eric still on the call?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, I'll respond for him. Yes.
Do you remember why you wanted that?
Yep. So this one came up when we were doing the UTF-8 stuff, I do believe. I mean, basically we have this internally already. We use this in corelib, and with the proliferation of nuint or nuint or whatever you want to call it, if you're doing low-level programming with pointers, the best way to maintain an offset is nuint. And when you want to do add or subtract offsets from a ref, we don't have that API today. We have the int pointer.
Can we overload between int pitter and nuint? Tanner?
We cannot, because
nuint
it's the same type.
is uint pointer.
Yeah, they're different types.
No, they're not. They are fundamentally the same type as far as IL is concerned.
Wait, int
One's
pointer
signed,
and
one's
nuint?
unsigned.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
I see the difference here of it. Yes, it's this is uint pitter instead of int pitter. So
Right.
You can overload on the signedness, just not on the inputter versus inint.
yeah.
Right.
Did we decide, by the way, that it was or was not a breaking change to take an API that currently takes an int pointer parameter and to say, well, you're actually an int instead?
It should be fine for inputs. For outputs, there's considerations that have to be made.
Okay.
So I have another question. For primitive types that have compiler support for operators, what happens if we define a custom operator? Does the compiler completely ignore those? Or does the compiler merge them with the one the compiler knows about?
I believe it depends on the exact scenario, and Neil is probably the best person to talk to about this.
Like basically the question is, if we take these proposed APIs, there really isn't anything. Like, are they really unsafe in nature?
Yeah.
They're dealing with refs, so yes, because you're taking a ref and making it point to
Something else.
You have a
something
ref
else.
to the second element in an array, and you say, "Great, now back up 4 elements." Like, where are you?
Oh, I see.
Or past the end of the array when you add an add.
Okay, then
Yeah.
never mind. So because my suggestion was to make them custom operators on the thing, but that wouldn't work then. So then, I guess you have to rename them. It's the only other option.
No, they're fine. They're fine because he's proposing adding unsigned overloads to the signed variants we already have, but using newint
Oh.
instead of uint pitter directly.
No, I get it.
Right.
That's what threw me at the beginning. Is I thought that this was just taking int pitter and adding and making inint, but he's doing newint.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Interesting.
virtually what this is proposing uint pointer APIs, but when you use nuint, you also get the compiler generated attribute on
Gotcha.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because newint is really, and this is what we just did with the string length. That's really size t, or rather, if you have size t, it's really newint. And adding offsets in C makes sense with a size of. So
Right. We do this internally in CoreLib. We have this already, and we like prefer this API, right?
Mhm.
So this is just like proposing to expose that so other people can do the exact same optimizations.
yeah, so these are the 4 things you're adding. All exist as ref t source and signed int pitter, byte offset and element offset, and now we're just adding the unsigned version, but using the new type alias now that we have it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it seems reasonable to me.
See how long it takes for that thumbs up to show up on YouTube.
The one we left off, I'm not proposing uint.
Yeah,
right?
I
Like
was
if you
about
look
to
at
ask
the
that.
top, how there's 6 of them, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. We honestly should be directing people who are using these APIs toward using inint and newint wherever practical. So I don't think we should be adding in the future int or uint based overloads.
And uint flows to newint, I think.
Right.
While we're here,
Yes.
in unsafe, something that there's 2 things that unsafe doesn't handle today. Namely, most of the methods on it are generic, and and because they're generic, that means you can't do anything if you have a ref to a pointer type or a ref struct type. The ref struct type we can't easily handle, but the pointer type we can. Is that something that we want to try and address?
So I'm not following the last
How?
one. I mean, I understand that you can't do refs to something with pointers, but like, what was the ref with structs?
You can't have a generic to a ref struct.
Oh, ref structs.
How does,
I see.
But
Okay.
how does that affect this? What scenario is currently blocked?
Well, so for example, if you have a ref to a field, which is a t pointer,
Mhm.
let's say you have an int pointer,
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes.
it's impossible to use these APIs to update the ref. And so the fix for that is to also expose variants that take it's basically the same signature, except on the return and on the input, you make it a T star. That way you've got the overload that works with pointer types as well.
So that's like subtract byte offset of t ref t star source,
Yep.
and then it returns a ref t star.
Yep. Because
So-
you can't actually have a generic T star. You have to put the star in the more concrete type instantiation thing.
We don't have any flavors of those today, though, right?
Right.
We have
It's-
void star.
It's something that that comes up anytime you have a ref to a field which happens to be a pointer type.
So
Yeah.
like once every 3 years.
Well, in Tanner's work, probably once every 3 minutes, but yeah.
I mean, I would probably only do it with the unsigned offsets unless you think it's important to also do the signed offsets. But
No,
I
I
think this is a new proposal. Like I think this deserves a separate discussion.
I agree with that. Like, it's also like, as Levi hinted, like, I'd like to understand better what the scenarios are. I mean, I think I get it, but I have not a good handle of like how rare is that actually.
and what's the workaround? Like, how expensive is the workaround, and how common is the thing, and what would it look like?
is pinning, converting, doing the operation using pointer arithmetic,
Mhm.
returning a ref to that dereferenced pointer, and then unpinning.
Right, but I mean, like, part of the question would be like, what's the kind of thing that you're writing when you're doing it, and how much other work like that are you already doing? So is it really buying anything, or is it just one step in the process? And if it's just one step in the process, then maybe it needs a more holistic proposal.
Okay, I can do a new proposal for that, and for all the variants of unsafe that have generic and should have pointers.
Because it's the like, what are you doing when you're doing this? Do we think that you're really writing idiomatic C# at that point, and is it worth making the accelerators for?
You're
That's-
writing
Those are the questions.
fast code, not idiomatic. That's why you're using unsafe.
But this is also why, like, I've been trying to push for a while. We should just get language support for stuff like this if feasible.
Yeah, that's kind of my concern, is that because these clutches at the type system level result in this explosion of things, right? And that's the thing I don't like.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the only reason that we even have unsafe.add is because we don't have a ref type in C# that you can also do plus on. Like, if we had that, these APIs all go away for the most part. At least the APIs that do arithmetic. So we've actually had some prototypes internally of working ref types with overloaded operators, but the JIT kind of falls over when it sees them, which is unfortunate.
Well, and I've got a proposal that's half-baked right now on exposing a new type called pointer of T in system that operates essentially like nullable of T, in that it would have special language and runtime support. And so you could then use pointer types in generics.
Nice.
But there's also the possibility that the runtime could just allow pointers in generics. But that requires more investigation as well.
Yeah. Also, when things are half-baked, you just need to try harder. Especially in Washington, where weed is legalized. Anyway, bad joke. So let's move on to the other one then. Okay, Father asked for something. No, is the default answer.
What's the issue number?
It's 37539. 37539. Add ability to perform 0-byte reads in stream pipe reader. Bool wait for data.
Networking streams support 0-byte reads? That's a violation of the Stream API contract.
Is it though?
The statement for stream.read is if it returns 0, you have hit the end of data.
I don't think this is a stream, though, is it?
Well, it's a stream pipe reader, right? So it's that's a stream over a pipe reader.
Yeah, it says it relies on the stream supporting 0-byte reads, which networking and SSL do.
That is
Because I don't think we use -1 as end of. I think we use 0, and it's ambiguous, and that's why they have to block.
Yeah, so you're right. There is a read byte API on stream that returns -1 when the end of file is reached.
Okay, so this would have to do all sorts of crazy things to like using read byte instead of using read to understand. Well, I don't know. You still wouldn't know. Is it that there's no data now, or that the stream's been closed? So.
Yeah, and you can't. I'm trying to brainstorm what would workarounds be. If you passed a cancellation token into read and the cancellation token timed out, the underlying stream could be terminated. You can't use it as a polling mechanism reliably.
So then, basically, what he's doing is breaking into jail. Then,
like, it seems like it. I just don't even know how this would work. Is really the problem. I don't know that we can add the API, and if we're adding an API that is changing visible behavior, which it obviously is, then presumably we need to add it or then we need to make the decision: are we adding it as compatibility, or we think that the new feature is what people want by default, and we rarely make that decision.
and you're positive that this is what the contract of stream is? It's not like it returns negative numbers?
No, stream.read is contracted to return 0 when end of file is reached. I don't know what happens if you pass in a 0 length buffer, though.
So if you read stream.read, what we put on MSDN, total number of bytes read into the buffer can be less than the number of bytes allocated if that many bytes are not currently available, or 0 if the end of the stream has been reached. So in .NET 1, we should have said -1 if the end of the stream has been reached, but we didn't. We said 0, and that means you can't ever return 0 in the middle without someone believing legitimately that they've hit the end of the stream.
But how does this work for things like, what is it called? Memory mapped files where you communicate between row processes. Isn't that also a way to say, like, you need to read more before you have seen the entirety? But then it doesn't mean you should close the stream once you're done. It just means end of message, basically.
I mean, if you're using a memory mapped file for communication, you have to invent your protocol of how you know where to look. So presumably that's you write a length and set up your I'm ready for you to read bit somewhere.
I see.
But yes, and read async agrees 0 for the end of the stream.
And then it just means dispose, basically, for the receiving. Like, you can close your file, and then that's bad, basically, right? Because that's not what you want.
Because essentially what you're supposed to write for stream is a while loop. And you say while current read equal read where you're writing, comma, the offset that we've already read so far is not equal to 0. Because once the local read returns 0, that's telling you there's no more data, and you move on. Because we don't expose a is EOF or anything like that. And we a long time ago, we buried it all in read returning 0. And so again, that's just I don't understand what this would do. We don't have a way of asking, is data available on stream at the base class.
So, but by the way, like I'm following through the various links in this issue. SSL stream.read does actually return 0 today. To mean sorry, SSL stream.read, you can pass in a 0 length buffer and it will return an incomplete task until data is received, and then it returns 0 from read. But I believe that's only if you pass in a 0 length buffer, which makes sense, I guess.
And maybe that's what he means here, of that it's if you give it the empty buffer, that there are things that understand how to do block. But again, like you're I guess measuring it based on the task. So the empty buffer. That probably feels like it's actually an accident in SSL stream and not intentional.
They have a unit test for it.
That just means it was an accident that someone depended on.
Maybe.
So I guess maybe I misunderstand what he meant. So does he mean bufferless reads is you call stream.read and you pass in an empty buffer? Yes. And then the method will tell you how much data is available, right? Because read will
no. So the method blocks or returns an incomplete task if data is not available, as soon as data becomes available or the end of the file is reached, it either returns 0 had you called the synchronous API, or completes the task had you called the asynchronous API.
Because read is not supposed to ever return a number bigger than buffer.length, because you gave it a buffer, it told you how much it wrote to it.
Yeah. So one interesting thing here is that this is actually kind of an ambiguous scenario in stream.read, because I don't think anyone ever, here we go. The implement, so according to MSDN, the implementation will block until at least 1 byte of data can be read. In the event that no data is available, read returns 0 only when there is no more data in the stream and no more is expected, such as a closed socket or an end of file. So it looks like from reading MSDN here, it sounds like passing a 0 length destination buffer was supposed to be considered an error, because otherwise there's no way to fulfill the contract of the API correctly. But it sounds like certain types have already violated that contract, so now we're just asking for more types to do so.
Well, he's asking for a thing on pipe reader that takes advantage of the ones that do it wrong, and then presumably as a follow-up, say that the doing it wrong is now the way to do it right.
Yeah, but again, like reading MSDN very strictly, like MSDN very clearly says 0 means there is no more data in the stream and you've reached the end of the file, period. Which the implication of that, even though it's not explicitly said, is it is invalid to pass a 0 length array as a destination into the read APIs.
Right, which means I don't understand how this wait for data on a stream pipe reader options is going to work. I guess it could just say that it takes the read task and throws it away, but that read's already going to have a side effect now. You can't stop it. It's also unclear what happens if you, it's clear that you're violating the intent of read if you pass 0 as the count that it's allowed to read.
Yeah. Really, they're just pulling, asking, do you have data? And they don't want to have a dummy throwaway buffer while they're pulling, waiting for data to come in. I think that's really all it is.
But the proposal is to add this wait for data Boolean on stream pipe reader. Right? That's what I see on screen.
Yeah.
And then my statement is, even if we added this, I don't know what it means to say false. Presumably it's then the feature work of all the follow-up of say that this is the new behavior of that somehow we're getting this feature into stream, and I don't even know what it means, because you can't really tell the difference between it returned 0 for end of stream and you returned 0 for I don't have data yet, followed by ooh, I have data. Like you can accidentally depend on the task not completing and then eventually completing to mean there's either data or someone closed the stream now.
Yeah.
That it has gone into a terminal state and you got 0 because you told it 0 is the biggest number it's allowed to write. But they could have easily checked that in a precondition and returned early, and that totally seems like a thing that could easily happen. And stream really isn't set up for this, and I think we need to do something different on stream in order to make it work. So I think that this needs this is, again, I just can't imagine what this API would do.
Yeah, it would also make it difficult to wrap a buffered stream or anything else around it, because the stream is supposed to be an abstraction, and now you're saying I rely on an implementation detail of the type that's being created, even though I'm using an abstraction.
Right. And
which is
an implementation detail that violates what the abstraction was documented as having as a behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the joy of virtual everything is you can write down what it's supposed to do, but you can't write down what it actually does. Which is why template method pattern's better. You can limit your derived types into what they can do.
I think there are workarounds that ASP.NET can do at the moment in order to make this work better.
I mean, should we sit down with Fowler? Because it seems like we're still somewhat speculating of what, why, and whether that's acceptable.
Yeah,
No,
I
like,
don't
I get
understand.
the scenario makes sense. Like the scenario makes sense. Basically what they're doing is they have a bunch of idle connections, and the only way to pull those the only way to ask, do these connections have any data that I should be reading, is to call their read APIs, but read requires you to pass a buffer in. So at minimum, what they would have to do is they would have to pass a 1 byte buffer into every single one of these read APIs while they're just waiting for all the tasks to finish. So now if they're waiting for 20,000 concurrent reads, most of which are just idle, they have 20,000 one element byte arrays just kind of sitting around doing nothing. And what they want is, can we eliminate allocating those 1 byte arrays and just pass in a shared singleton empty buffer into all of these?
So my question is
The
like,
scenario makes sense.
but even
But what's that have to do with the proposal of adding wait for data property?
Because what they're doing here is saying how they want us to solve the problem. What I just described is the problem they actually have.
so, but Levi,
And
even if you were to allocate, how does this actually work? Because if you actually call read now, the stream advances by this 1 byte, right?
Yes, but you had intended to read the data anyway. You were just waiting for data to arrive.
But that now also means that they have to stitch up that 1 byte with whatever else they actually read afterwards, right?
Which is pretty trivial.
I mean,
Fair enough.
I'm guessing the scenario here is that the stream pipe reader shouldn't create its 4K buffer if the stream that it's wrapping is already closed. Like, I think that's sort of the question it's trying to answer. And that if you never ended up calling read after data was available, then why did we need the buffer? But yeah, if this is depending on an implementation behavior of stream, we'd need to do that first. And then why would you ever set this to the other behavior? Like, what's the visible impact of this? And is it only here because you need to set it to false if you work with a stream that then throws? Like, if that's the case, it seems like they could opportunistically try that. So I'm unclear what the API is for, and I sort of understand the scenario from Levi, but I don't see how it's related to the API. So this needs work at best.
Well, normally the way that you do this, if you were following like proper handling, is you would gather the handles of all of the streams that you care about, and then you would pass every single one of those handles into a call to wait for any. And then wait for any would tell you which stream actually pinged and has data for you. I mean, it's basically a poll routine, just asynchronous.
I see. And we didn't make pipe reader stream public. Damn it. Because I was thinking maybe we can just expose an API on that stream it returns. It can tell you whether there's data, but
Yeah.
it's unfortunately, it returns the stream as the abstract stream type. So, I mean, what we could also do instead is we could like promote it all the way down to stream, right? And say like, yep, streams have the notion of telling you whether there's any data available for you. And
It's
then,
not a bad idea, honestly.
and that might actually be the way to do it, right? Because it seems less bad than supporting 0 byte reads, because that, as you know, doing it on read seems problematic because now everybody in the chain has to support that. Versus,
I mean, how are you planning on adding it to stream? It either needs to return true, return false, or throw.
well,
You have a can API and a do it API.
well,
Yeah.
either that or you do the trick that we did in other places, right? Because realistically, these things only have to be supported at the bottom. Everybody in the middle basically gets to just dispatch to the underlying stream. And this goes back to this whole, like, we need a delegating stream realistically so we can do these kind of forwards, right? Because realistically, yeah, the thing in the middle doesn't care. The thing in the middle just says, well, does the thing beneath me have any data, right? And so we wouldn't have to actually plumb it all the way through if we would have a proper delegating stream.
Well,
We
it
don't have
has
that.
data. Every wrapper stream on another stream has data if it has locally buffered something or its underlying stream has data. So there's actually probably work at every single level because very few stream implementations don't buffer their data locally.
Yeah, fair point. This is the other problem we have, yeah. Yeah, so then maybe then can and do is the better way of doing it. And then the best we could do is just supporting it through all the streams we have in the framework.
Right. But yeah, I think here it sounds like what we're really trying to do is change stream. So this needs a thing other than
the triage review.
Yeah. The scenario is an interesting scenario though. Like to receive a notification when there's any data available without you having called read. Huh.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I just don't think that this API does that.
Yeah, it's
I think
overloading
that
read to do
this
that
is
is scary.
saying, do you promise that the stream you're having me wrap is going to do that thing? If so, I'll depend on it. Otherwise, the exception's on you for passing me the wrong value.
Yeah.
Which effectively means that this is a throw on failure API, which we have guidance that says don't expose a Boolean for throw on failure.
Yeah.
So yeah, this just needs more
Yeah, someone in chat is
either
asking.
planning or clarity.
Someone in chat is asking, why don't we invite David? I mean, like, we usually dupe this if the issue upfront is big enough. We usually don't invite people upfront because we can't tell them when their issue pops up in a 2-hour review slot. And so it's just wasting people's time. But this one seems like we should have a dedicated meeting on for an hour and talk with him about it. So let me just schedule this for next week. And then I think...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that that this is even the right body for it at this stage. I think it just needs more behind the scenes planning before it's ready for
Yeah, I mean, like,
review.
I mean, we own Stream, right? So it doesn't seem unreasonable to actually have a design discussion of whether this should actually be part of Stream, right? It wouldn't be reviewable, more like arguably a design meeting.
Yeah.
And then the other issue that we still have is this one here, which is also pretty largish. I just read the comments. Basically, what it's proposing is making some things public. That's not the bad part. The more problematic part is this enum here. So it basically gives you great detail about what happened in the parser. And that seems reasonable at the surface, but it's dubious whether that actually helps. And so there's kind of different camps. So, you know, Cyrus was looped in because he actually did the parsing for Regex and Roslyn to basically allow you to colorize regexes and also give a bit more of an experience in Visual Studio with code completion when it comes to actually authoring regexes. And he basically said this data here wouldn't be sufficient to do that. So the question is really who would be consuming these error codes to do anything meaningful with them, because it wasn't sufficient to do colorization or parsing or anything useful in an IDE, which these things, you know, would only be useful for, right? Normally you don't care about why the regex wasn't valid unless you provide the tooling for that. So
I think it's probably unambiguous to give the equivalent of the operation status chars consumed of the regex parser made it this far before it couldn't get any further, and that means the error is either in the next thing, or you had an open parent that had no closing parenthesis, and it's like, I don't know where to finish.
You say that, but like, I mean, I don't know how much you use SQL, but SQL does this all the time, where it tells you syntax error near blah, and it's almost never.
Yeah,
it's almost never near blah.
it says near blah, but it's telling you it's after blah. I made it this far, but yes, it's maybe you only made it that far because you forgot the beginning opening parent.
Right. That's why I mean, for parsers, for lexers, yes, you get away with them, but for parsers, it's hard. And regexes are logically trees, right? Because you have, like, you know, parentheses and groupings and stuff. So like giving you the actual position isn't necessarily useful, right? If you have a missing closing parent, it's always the length of the string, right? Because that's when you find out that you have a missing closing parent. So like that's not like I'm skeptical that that would help as well. It probably would help in some cases, but what I like about this proposal is it's just giving you an int, right? Versus this one gives you, like, I don't know, 30 enum members, which seems a little bit over the top. So yeah, like I think who's on the hook for this? Prashant, I think, is on the hook for this. Yeah. So like, yeah, we will invite him next week and talk about that as well. So I would just book the Tuesdays for 1 hour for David's issue and then another hour for this one, and then we would be done.
Are you saying we're back to real time?
Yeah, that was the last 2 issues.
We'll make sure to get some stuff on your plate.
Oh, don't worry. Like, we have stuff. I mean, I can just file new issues. It's just like we finally bounced after like 3 years of continuously having 40 issues.
Well,
We've been doing three of these meetings a week since what, February? So.
I'll just bulk move all API suggestions to API ready for review.
Wednesday. be on vacation for 2 weeks, and part of that is likely going to be me opening proposals for things I need for my personal project. So we'll have a whole slew of things.
Does it involve another 3,000 intrinsics?
No, I'm not going to propose AVX 512.
You are not going to yet, is that what you mean? Because clearly you already thought about it.
Thought about it, and 4,500 new APIs that's something.
Not that this has ever stopped you, Tanner.
Need where to.
All right, then let's call it a day. And it's good. I like where we are. Good job, everyone.
Hooray.
Yay.
And then I see you next week. Enjoy your weekend. Do whatever you want to do.
Likewise.
Yeah, nobody said anything. I'm like, you guys are not nice people. All right, bye-bye.
Well, I was trying to change the Haben Sie gehört das Deutsche Band from a question into a imperative action, and realized I don't know enough German grammar. So you should watch The Producers, because Haben Sie gehört das Deutsche Band is awesome.
Have you heard the German band? Is that a phrase that is popping up in that context a lot?
In the movie The Producers, and I think you'll like the newer one with Will Ferrell, and Matthew Broderick. They're holding an audition, and someone auditions with the song that's made up for the play and the movie and whatever. Haben Sie gehört das Deutsche Band. It's actually a really cute song. I think it plays Bavarian music very well. He likes the oompa, and it's good dancing, and Will Ferrell's fun. So
You're right. Will Ferrell was in the recent film.
yeah, Will
I
Ferrell
had to page that back in.
is
He
Is he
played
still
the
alive?
German playwright.
he's the author of the
Yeah, he's the playwright.
of the play whose name I won't say on this call.
So you want the movie from that was recent, right? Not from 1967.
I mean, yeah, you don't want. The 67 one's good too, but the remake is its version of Haben Sie gehört das Deutsche Band. It's either new for that one or that's the better one.
Oh, it's from
'Cause it was-
2005. It's Whitby time frame. It's pretty old actually, by any
Because
sense.
it was-
but it's newer than 1967.
That is
'cause
true.
it was originally the movie, right, in the 60s, and then it became a stage play, and then the stage play was adapted back into a movie.
Yeah,
Right,
it's-
and I
if I
think that a couple of the songs were written when he made it a stage play from
Yes.
the movie version, and I think that this is one of the new ones. So they are different. If you see the Broadway, if anybody does the Broadway showing, then the 2000 whatever movie is almost
It's pretty
going to be
close
the
to it.
stage setting, because I've also seen it on stage, and it was just that movie, but without being able to change scenery as much.
Jesus, Uma Thurman was also in there. Like, I've never heard of this movie, I think.
The
It's awesome.
Producers? Oh, it's a fantastic film.
Yeah, you should totally watch it, and I think as a German you'll get an extra kick out of it.
Sure.
It makes fun of the most famous German in very fun and laughable ways.
The one that we have seen all the memes for.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah,
It-
nothing beats
It's
Charlie
on
Chaplin.
Netflix in every country other than the US, it looks like.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hilarious. You'll have a good time.
All right, add it to my watch list. Alrighty.
Yeah, only that would turn into free tickets to whatever Mel Brooks's next spectacular production is. But
Is
Instead,
Mel
I'm
Brooks
just-
still alive?
He is.
He must be.
He and
unspeakably
his
old
son
at
Max
this point.
Brooks actually did a PSA at the start of the pandemic, and Max Brooks was standing outside of his father's house, basically saying "Hey, stay home. Help keep our comic talent like my dad alive."
Holy fuck, he's 94.
Yes.
and awesome.
No, he's great.
Yep. Now he kind of looks like the yogurt character that he played.
Yeah, they can finally make Spaceballs too, and he doesn't need to spend very long in makeup.
Yeah, perfect.
So
Oh my goodness. All right, this was an interesting API review. See you
Are we
guys.
still live?
We are still live. Like, why not? This
Yeah.
is the fun part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Good times.
All right.
People get to see we're good people.
Awesome.
All right.
See you later.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.